Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. You're listening to Venus Unplugged. I haven't broadcasted in a little while. I've been busy exploring inferior functions within and taking a bit of a sabbatical to really understand what's necessary now. I mean, here at Venus Unplugged, we explore all aspects, certainly of the archetypal world, and most of all, the archetype of Venus, which is not sweetness and light. And, loving and falling in love is certainly one of the aspects, but it's also eros, the urge towards consciousness. So, looking within and looking at the world, I was feeling, what is it that we really need to be working on? It's very easy to point a finger or have opinions and, fix the world with all our opinions, but that does squat. What changes the world is our own inner work. The change, the treasure is within, as all mythology and fairy tales tell us. And so I was thinking about this, and it's like that blind spot, where is our blind spot? Now, it's a blind spot, so we don't know it's there. Of course, every stranger knows it's there, and every lover knows it's there when we hit it, and we can't necessarily see it to ourselves. So Jung came up with this concept, and he says it's like he has no kind of scientific foundation for this. Not that it has to be scientific, because he's dealing with psyche. Psyche isn't measurable, or even, we hear about the unconscious. The unconscious is not a place. It's around and in and through. All of these elements and archetypes are around and in and through. So it is difficult to get a grasp on the blind spot. And our world right now is in its inferior function, walking around not having any consciousness of what is going on. So if we, meaning the individual, takes up the task, which is, of course, a form of loving and self-love, we take up the task of discovering our own inferior function, and when it's operating, and you can never get control because it's connected to the collective unconscious, and the collective unconscious is the primitive forces in humanity, but it is also the gold that is in what they talk about in alchemy. The gold is in the shit, so we've got to go to that place, that unpleasant place. And it's unpleasant because we don't know anything about it. So what Jung talks about is somewhere you have the secret of your particular pattern. Now, I personally see it as high adventure to go in. I don't even know if you go in pursuit, because that's, I'm more of an introvert, so I go within. I kind of receive the pursuit, and sometimes you just feel like a red balloon that's, on a string, and someone let go of it, and there you're floating along. And it takes a lot of letting go of what you think you know. The ego hates this. And this is why so few people we wind up doing it. We get tricked into it. We get dreams. We fall in love. Very often, most times, we fall in love with a person who's carrying our inferior function, and it drives us insane. But if we understood that it is the place where we feel helpless and vulnerable because we don't know anything about that, it's where we just don't get it. And so the other three functions we build up and think, oh, well, I could survive, and then we fall in love with the inferior function, or we lose our cookie over something that everybody else is like, what's going on here, right? So, and if we can start getting a sense of this, we can also begin to see what's going on in the world. And what we can do, which is our own work towards individuation. Now, individuation is a Jungian term. That means it's a movement towards wholeness. And psyche, soul, is ruthless. It is not sweetness and light. You can't give it a list. You can't busboy it. And, what it wants is your wholeness. And it's ruthless. It's not sweetness and light. But if we go with a willingness, and we know this is going to be a journey and a half, but the contribution and you don't do it for the reward. You do it for the journey. If you're doing it for the reward, that's, the ego. Or if you're doing it because you want to get the treasure, or you want to get the dragon's eye, or whatever it is that, you're going for, don't bother. It's just going to cause so much trouble in your life. But if you can begin to say, that place, that very place that I feel so frightened and vulnerable, I mean, that happens when you fall in love. Number one, it's a fall. So the ego kind of takes a vacation, and people are swimming around in this eros energy and this delight and this longing and this longing for relatedness, and there really are, a kind of happy possession. An archetypal energy has flooded both people, and very often we run from this because of the task that love requires. And that's that we understand the inferior function, so we're not ruining everything for ourselves and others. Because when we get triggered, but if we start to understand, now there's a lot of yakety-yak about the four types, and they have all these initials, and I'm a this and I'm a that. It's like, when something hits the collective in that way, and we're glib, we're in danger. Because this is serious work. This isn't glib, and it's not something we don't use. There's something called the Myers-Briggs test, right? And it's on the websites and everything, and people do that. But that's not a really critical examination of oneself. Just because we can sing the tune doesn't mean we're in rhythm. I mean, people will say, "Well, I'm a this and I'm a that," I'm a thinking type, or I'm a feeling type, or a sensei type, or that. Just because you can say it doesn't mean that you understand it. And when you really understand it, believe me, you're very cautious about and respectful. I mean, I love that people are discovering this stuff, and I love that they're aware of so much of what's going on. But it's not the one answer. I mean, this is the tricky part, particularly about the Jungian stuff. It's fluid. It moves, and it's very much mercurial. It's the trickster, the truth and the lie and the truth, and that's also the way dreams are, and that's the way life is. So by working with the inferior function, as I said, it's slippery, slidey, dangerous, because we will see things and know things and have to accept things about ourselves. And also how we're prejudiced in our view and why certain people will trigger us. So before we have the reaction, just an example, it's like, my first function is intuitive. That's where I'm going to go. So the intuitive, it sees the whole pattern. It jumps over the facts. I don't care about the facts because I'm seeing and sensing, and that doesn't mean that I have it's going to show me. Okay, then I have to use the other functions to start working with it. So a person who is a sensate, which means just give me the facts, ma'am. That's all they want to know. An intuitive person will drive a sensate person crazy. Because it's like, the sensate person is, where are you coming up with this? Where do you see that? Where's this coming from? And it's like, you don't know. It's like coming because that's where you see it. It's authentic. Or vice versa, if the sensei person says, you got to give me some data on this. It's like, well, I don't have any data. So data to get. It's there. Or if the inferior function happens to be sensate, you really have to be diligent about taking care of your body, because that's where the living psyche is. We are within it, and it is within us. But if there's the inferior function is sensate, they're not so interested in that. They're interested in other things. So if we know how it operates and what it's about, we can, the task of individuation, which happens with or without us, because we're all going there, is to start to question, because eventually we need to be, all of the four functions and learn how to use them. And that's what it's about. So, it's a terrible word, inferior function. It just makes you feel like creepy. But, okay, what he means by that is that it's the last place we're going to go. But it is the only place and the true place that we must go to get the treasure. And the treasure is who you authentically are. So there's always lots of work to be done, and it's fascinating because you're fascinating. And in order to learn to love and be loved, we need to understand these inferior functions. So let's say you're with somebody and they're displeased. You've hurt them. Now it's like if you're not a feeling type, it's like, what feelings? What are you talking about? There's no switch. It's like you can't even calculate that. You can't even, what is that about? And it's like, oh, you hurt my feelings. Now, you've just walked into your blind spot. You might as well be in the forest, stark naked, at the beginning of fucking time, because you do not know what this woman is talking about. Because the feelings have to do with values, but it's just they're consumed with the feeling. It's like a hidden code. And, you're looking from side to side. It's like, I know that she's telling the truth. There's a code. I don't have any idea what this code is. So if she's in her inferior function, and the accusation, you don't communicate, or you don't feel, or you don't know me. Well, nobody knows us. That's really unfair, because if you want somebody to know you, you need to reveal yourself, shadow and light, or don't broker the deal. Now, if a feeling is touched with the feeling type, so that's where they're gonna. That's how they value everything, and through the feeling level, it's their job to be able to explain to the person who is being accused of having no feelings, which is going to make anybody feel awful. You have no feelings. No, it may be your inferior function. You don't know that language. Okay, she talks cat, you talk dog. You know what I mean? Then you begin to recognize, wait a second, I feel vulnerable. I feel stupid. I feel like running or bludgeoning this other person because they're talking in a language that I sense is real, I know is real, but I can't get to it. Then you're in your inferior function. Now, of course, catching this is usually in reflection. How was it that you blew up or ran away, shut down? Or when people blame one another for not understanding. You know what? If you don't know, you don't know, and therefore you don't understand. And that's part of what the communication is. That's part of the nature of Venus. It brings together these energies that are within all of us. And it also makes it very, very interesting as to what is going on. So I'm going to spend a couple of weeks probably, because I always think I'm going to do this like in 22 minutes, and of course that doesn't really pan out because it's such deep stuff. And so the blind spot, okay, is also where your unlived life lives. So the unlived life can be those talents or abilities that you have no idea. But they show up in states of neurosis or anxiety. All right? So this is the great work. This is what the alchemists called the great work, because it is where we're touching on such profound, holy ground. And it doesn't matter what spiritual practice you have or what religion, because they all have these four functions and we're all working with them in one way or the other, okay? So this inferior function, and then we have the extrovert and the introvert. So an extroverted person is going to, everything needs to be acted out in the world, that's their stage. An introverted person takes it within. So if everything is feeling okay within, they're fine. But as soon as it starts moving and getting a little crazy in there, they've got to go to work and figure out what is happening. So we can say these words, but understanding is really the depth of what we need to do here. And it can't be done with that critical mind that says, I'm going to go and I'm going to conquer this, because you are not conquering nothing. But you are in the middle of a great adventure. And if you want the world to change, and I believe this is why we have what we have in America now, because if this isn't the screaming poster for inferior function or us, nothing is. And when you tap somebody's inferior function, they just go rabid, unless they're taking on the task of understanding what this is. So let's just say in dreams, or I'm actually in solving any problem. So the four functions, all right. So the thinking type, they would look at their dreams for the basic, like, what's the basic structure? How does this work? What is the wheels and the gears? How does it work together? Now, the feeling type would kind of zero in on the emotional hotspots. And the sensation type, which is facts in the body, should just don't give me the thinking and don't give me the emotion. Just tell me how this works. I just want the facts, And people can sometimes see this as the scientific, but very often scientists are really the intuitive because they make these leaps and then they figure it out. All right. So the sensate type would examine for the facts of the dreams. I made a left turn, or I made a right turn. I was in a foreign country, or whatever it might be. Okay, they're going to structure that. And the intuitive type, it just sniffs out like these possible directions at what the dream can be hinting at. Now, in my practice, more times than not, a person, when I'm working with it, they get triggered, and it's actually a nanosecond of enlightenment. It's like, bam. It's like, wow, okay, their life just changed. Now, it takes years to understand and contain the enlightenment you received. It has nothing to do with me. I just happen to see it, okay? And when the activation happens, you also know this person is in for some huge changes. They may resist it tremendously and not want to go near it, but it's still going to be happening. So what is enlightenment? And that's another question. It's not sweetness and light. It's like suddenly we become aware, shadow and light. And so this process, this journey, and these four functions is we need to understand what we don't understand or accept that we know but we don't know. Or even more important, I know that I know but I don't know how I know. And if there's more understanding of just not the labeling, not the, I'm this and I'm that, and as if people are supposed to magically understand what the hell you're talking about. Again, this glibness or spiritual narcissism, what are you talking about? It's communication. That's the Venusian. Now, very often, the inferior function, the only way that we can work with it is through creativity and through art, which is why we struggle so much. Not for lack of talent. It's coming from a dangerous place that we don't trust and we don't know. When we're doing acts of creation, breathing is an act of creation, loving is an act of cooking, whatever we do is an art form. But in this Western world, if you're not getting paid for it, it's not worth it. But in the internal world, that is one of the approaches. How do I creatively work with this fire-breathing dragon? So these functions, we can feel them. Now, if we start to understand them more, we can communicate better because if let's say I'm dealing with a feeling type, I need to be very aware of feeling words. I need to stay with the heart and with the feeling, and you can tell the truth, but it needs to be on an emotional level, because the feeling is just the emotional value function. What does this feel like? It doesn't feel good. Well, it's not supposed to feel good. You need to know that you're in the midst of change, and change does not feel good. So, to understand ourselves and our others is to be able to consciously say, as conscious as we can be about this nowhere man's land of the unconscious. As I said, it's not a place, so we're not going to, it's not beneath us, it can be anywhere. It is, it's coexisting, which is also why it helps if we can learn to tolerate paradox. Both are true. We don't choose one over the other. I mean, that there needs to be a fluidity of opposites. Because this business of who's right and who's wrong and whose God is better than, this is destroying this planet. So, learning how to work with the parts of ourselves that we don't know, and our enemy is always our inferior function. So it can be the enemy within, it can be the enemy without. When somebody triggers, before we get, on our righteous horse and ride out into the dust, to nowhere, we can reflect a little bit and say, okay, what was touched here? Because we're defenseless. And very often, the response is infantile. Screaming, yelling, crying, how could you do this, blah, 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 blah. And the person just, we run. I was just like, oh, my God, I didn't expect this. Well, you poke the bear of the inferior function, you are just going to get one angry bear. So, let me see here. So the thinking type, the feeling type, the intuitive type, and the sensate type. The first function is where we go to. It is natural to us. It's how we resolve everything, but it's not one function fits all. It doesn't work that way. All right. And so if we start to just gently understand the perceptions of what is really going on, our communication is better. And it broadens and helps our own, because we don't individuate all by ourselves. I mean, we do a lot of inner work, and if you're not doing it, it's doing you. It's happening whether you like it or not. And that's the good news about really what's happening in the world right now. There is such an enormous call towards individuation, and that's what people aren't grasping. They're grasping what the external is about. That's not the issue. The issue is the call towards individuation within your own self, within your own home, within your own being. And when we recognize that, we take the projections off of the world, because the world is always the world. And we begin to recognize what is happening in our world right now is pushing us towards very unpleasant places, primitive places, but absolutely there's treasures that we don't know about, and gifts and talents, and art and creativity, and most of all, love, because that's our love pocket, the real, heartfelt, the love of life itself. And life is demanding. Forget what we think the universe wants for us. What is life demanding of us? And she will have her way. So that's part of why I want to be looking at this inferior function or these blind spots, so we can start really looking at this and begin to understand that there's a pony in this horse shit someplace, and we're going to get our ponies, and we're going to ride. And that's what it's about from this intuitive point of view, all right? And there's many, many ways that we can function in our life, and this is one of them. And the move towards individuation. That's why we're in the pickle that we're in. We're not going to be destroyed. We're certainly not going to destroy the earth. She's never going to allow that. We're going to learn to grow and move and understand this inferior function, because there's no buzzword that's going to stop, and there's no explaining, Lucy. You ain't going to be able to explain nothing, because this is the power of it. So, till next week, au revoir.